This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by high-performing new Carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. And of course, it's Agronomic Monday today. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your work day. And of course, big shout out as well to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast, no matter where that is, Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It is great to have you in the RealAg community, and make sure you tell your friends, your family, your farming neighbors. The more the merrier, they say here on this show. Okay, we got a great one here for you here today. Looking forward to it. We got Jeremy Boychyn. He's with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions. Great agronomist. He's going to join us for a couple segments. He's got a lot of things to talk about here today. We're also going to hear from Nevin Rosaasen. He is with Alberta Pulse Growers. And Nevin is like a really super passionate guy about agronomy. And he is going to talk today about dynamic thresholds. What is that? Well, he's going to get to that in a little bit. And of course, we'll also hear today from Peter W.P. Johnson, who was on a recent Wheat School episode, talking to Rob McLaughlin from C&M Seeds. C&M Seeds is one of those Wheat School sponsors along with Alberta Wheat Commissions. So we got two of the three Wheat School sponsors on today's show. And Syngenta, don't worry, we'll get you on here in a few weeks for sure. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. So, playoffs tonight, who you got? Who you got for NHL playoffs? Of course, the NBA playoffs started over the weekend, but I know many of you. Now, there is some, I think of a few. Brian Voth, Phil Shaw, you guys are all about the basketball, and rightly so, okay? So this is kind of a cool time of the year. You got baseball, you got NBA playoffs, and by the way, the NBA and the NHL are kind of both two leagues where we get ripped off in the regular season. The intensity, the important, like just the grind of every minute. Every minute matters when it gets to the NBA and NHL playoffs. So we're ripped off in the regular season, and when we get to the playoffs, everybody seems to all of a sudden ratchet it up a little bit. And that's what we got right now. So we got NBA, NHL playoffs, we got Major League Baseball in full swing. How about those Blue Jays on the weekend taking 2 of 3 against Tampa? Not liking what I'm seeing at Alex Manoah. I do wonder if he is hurt. I've heard that from a few people. I do wonder as well. But Blue Jays looking good, looking sharp. Like the makeup of this team. They got some dirt bags on this team. They got some grinders. I like it. We are much better defensively out in the outfield, and they're off to a really good start. This week is really cool, though. We got the entire RealAgriculture team in Calgary for our RealAg Summit, annual thing. So we got some special shows lined up here for this week and getting everybody involved. Looking forward to that. So make sure you check out Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. I don't know what we're gonna do, but it'll be fun. I promise you. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're gonna get rocking with Jeremy Boychyn right after this.
Let's be honest, the auger is one of the most hardworking pieces of equipment on your farm. It runs long hours at high capacities during harvest to get grain into your bins. Augers need to be reliable, tough, and able to handle the workload. AGI Westfield's MKX2 is built just for that. The new open-end discharge spout delivers a faster, more efficient flow of grain. The result? Less plugging and uses up to 20% less horsepower to operate. MKX2, what growers need.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here. and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. This segment is brought to you by the Wheat School, which is sponsored by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Wheat Commission. Go to you can go to albertawheat.com, but I also encourage you to go to wheatschool.com and check out all of our agronomic videos. Oh boy, I got a case of the Mondays here. Speaking of Alberta Wheat, it is Jeremy Boychyn. Jeremy, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for that extra promotion, Shaun. I very much appreciate it.
Well, you're a good group over there. You deserve it. Absolutely. It's all good, man. It's all good. Okay, we got a lot of different stuff to discuss here, and thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Now, Charles Geddes, who is at Lethbridge, the Lethbridge Research Station with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, he's been doing a lot of work on weed resistance, and this whole topic of Group 14 and some of the resistance being found. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, kochia right now is the monster to be concerned about, and I know it has been that way for quite some time, but it continues to grow. And yeah, Charles Geddes has been doing a lot of research understanding the levels of resistance and where we're finding them and how we should be managing those issues. So recently on Twitter, he posted that he has been finding Group 4 resistance or Group 14 resistance, so to authority, Sulflanifacil. I said that terribly wrong. Sulflanifacil.
Better you than me.
I've got a case of the Mondays too, apparently. So now keep in mind this was applied foliarly post-emergence. So authority is a pre-emergence, so not under field conditions, but under greenhouse conditions, seeing that resistance. But we're still seeing resistance to that foliar applied product. So producers should be keeping an eye on whether some of their kochia is escaping from their Group 14, specifically authority. He is doing additional testing on some of the other Group 14, so we don't know whether there's anything else other than authority that's popping up right now. And he's also doing testing on whether that pre-emerge or residual Group 14, we're seeing any resistance in that form of application. So producers just need to be on the watch out and to know that this is a potential risk. I believe he pulled this seed from Saskatchewan, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen in any of the other provinces. So keep an eye.
Yeah. Thank you for making that point. Now, this is me just sort of like really broad brushing it, but I find that this is a topic that people hear a lot about, but they don't really get paying attention until they actually have the problem on their farm. And I know some of you are more proactive than that, but that's an observation I have. Be thinking about it. Just because it was found in a different geography doesn't mean it can't be found where you are. So keep this one on your mind for sure. Is that a fair way to put it, Jeremy?
I would say so. I mean, anything that has wheels that's moving between those two provinces or three provinces has the capacity to take that seed and disperse it. So
yeah.
Consider each province your neighbor, and what happens to your neighbor has a high risk of happening to you.
Let's talk about seeding rates on barley. I know you've been getting some questions about this. I think it was a couple weeks ago I sort of talked about how please don't do I seeded about 2 bushels an acre. We need to be doing some other things.
Yeah, so I mean, it is that time of the year, Shaun. We're talking about seeding rates, and I've had a few questions coming in. What should I be targeting for my feed or my malt barley? We've seen historic research look at what seeding rates we should be going for these two different markets for spring barley. Malt barley, we really gained the research on what we should be targeting from a John O'Donovan study that was published in 2011, looking at 8 locations across Western Canada, specifically on AC Metcalf, so keep that in mind. It is one variety that was tested, but they looked at seeding rates ranging from 100 to 500 seeds per meter squared. That's about 10 to 50 seeds per square foot. So in intervals of 100 or 10, depending on what unit you're using there. And he found that the optimum for yield and quality was 300 seeds per meter squared. So that was keeping in mind plump, that was keeping in mind yield, that was keeping in mind protein, all of the factors that are going to help with acceptance of your malt, keeping all of those things in mind. So when you're targeting malt, that is what the research supports, is going at that 300 seeds per meter squared range when it comes to feed. A little bit different. The range opens up a little bit. We have research going back to 1995 from Chidell and Helm, who looked at 2 and 6-year-old barley cultivars, actually a B and Harrington. So well, one of those is definitely before my time, Shaun. But ranging from 129 to 344 seeds per meter squared. They found that in the first 2 years that they did that, which was 99 and 91, there was no impact of seeding rate on yield. So that big of a range, no impact. But in 1992, they saw a significant increase in yield as they increased seeding rates. So there's going to be a environmental variability that happens there. And then the last one comes from LaFond in 1994. Mind you, this isn't the only 3 that there's other research that's happened. But LaFond in 1994 published on Harrington in the Indian Head region. And they actually seeded based on kilograms per hectare. So they weren't actually doing specific seeding rates. They were doing it kilograms per hectare, but doing the assumption of, say, 49 grams per 1,000 kernel weight, which could be a mid-range for barley, 30 pounds per acre, 60 pounds per acre, 90 pounds per acre, or 6, 12, 18, 25, 31, and 38 seeds per square foot. And they found that there was a yield increase as they increased those rates. Showing variability between 2 trials, but showing a trend towards increasing seeding rates, showing increasing yield. So that's where we get that 200 to 300 seeds per square meter for feed barley. And it's going to depend on your region. It's going to depend on your environmental conditions and the yield potential of where you're growing. So keep that in mind. Use a seeding rate calculator and target those ranges. The other thing I'll say on this, Shaun, is, again, these studies are done on historic varieties. We have plenty of new varieties, both Western Canadian, and we have some varieties that are European varieties that are showing outstanding performance in Western Canada. It may be worth entertaining, at least on your farm, some strip trials to see whether increasing seeding rates could be a benefit with some of these higher yielding, more efficient varieties. Well,
and you mentioned it, weather conditions, soil type will have a factor here on what number you go with. We talk a lot about precision agriculture, right? And so you can be totally geeked out with all the data and the tracking and all this kind of stuff. But this is easy precision. Be precise on your seeding rate, right? It's kind of old school. It's not as sexy. It's a little bit different than some of the tech things we talk about when we talk about precision ag, but have some precision when it comes to your seeding rate calculations based on the seed you're using and your conditions.
The way I talk about this, Shaun, is as technology moves along, the ability for us to control more factors on how we farm increases, and the more factors that you can control for and keep consistent year to year and make those adjustments that you need based on your farm, the less variability you're you're introducing into your system, the more consistency you're likely going to see in your yields and your yield stability outside of those factors that we can't control. There's so many factors we can't control. So if we can control the ones we can control, you're going to be better off.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you about winter wheat survivability. This is the time of the year we're getting out to the field and we're looking around, seeing how that winter wheat looks. What are some of the things we need to be watching for?
So I'm going to put an asterisk on this, Shaun, because this is Western Canada I'm going to talk about. So I don't want anyone in the eastern part of the province thinking about, or eastern part of the country thinking about this. But
dude, they're probably headed out already and applying fungicides. They're so far ahead of us when it comes to the growing season. Come on.
Somebody said it was 27 degrees there recently.
I know.
I don't know the banana belts of Canada down there. So at this point, it is way too early to be making a decision on whether your winter wheat has survived. We really want to be waiting to that mid to late May to make the decision on whether that winter wheat has survived, because it's still too cold. It's still going to look so hideous when you walk by there. But if the roots are still alive, we still have a high potential to get a great crop out of that. But it's not going to look that way when you drive by at 60. You got to get in, take a look, and dig up some of those plants. And one of the things you can do if you are this early and you really want to get an idea is dig up a few plants in the worst part of the field. Check the worst part of the field where you didn't have snow cover, where fertilizer use was we didn't get good fertilizer application, and you think that's probably going to be the worst part of the field. Take some plants from there, bring it inside, put it in a wet paper towel, and see what happens. If that stuff survives, it's a very, very high likelihood that the rest of your field is going to come to as well. If it doesn't survive, then start going to other areas of the field and doing the same thing and assessing whether you're going to get some survivability out of those other parts. And then really waiting to that May 15th, May 25th, so mid to late part of May to make the decision on whether you want to reseed. Because, at that point, then it's, we really want to think about getting those spring crops in, minimizing our yield impacts on spring crop seeding, because we know based on research from Ross McKenzie that the further we wait after April 1st, and again, this research was done on irrigation in southern Alberta, but it demonstrates the value of getting crops in early, that, we typically lose, depending on the crop, somewhere in between 0.5 to 1.5% yield every day after the end of April. So keeping that in mind, making that decision early, but not cutting that line of winter wheat too soon before it's given a chance to pull through. And
what about wheat streak mosaic?
Yeah, so that popped up last year in a few fields in southern Alberta, and it became a little bit of a concern because we know that wheat streak mosaic virus can cause impacts on yield and grain quality. It's carried by the wheat curl mite. So it's a flightless insect that will feed on winter wheat. If that winter wheat's infected, then the wheat curl mite gets infected with that, and then it'll get blown by the wind over to a spring wheat crop. And then it'll start to feed on that spring wheat and infect that crop. So you'll see yellowing of young leaves. As that crop matures, it'll get more yellow. You have less green material on that plant, which means less photosynthesis, which means less yield. And you'll have trouble filling that grain, which means more shriveled grain. So it can cause pretty significant issues. Because we saw it last year, we should be keeping our eyes out for it this year, specifically with winter wheat coming out of dormancy this spring. And as we move through the season, if there's any spring wheat or barley that's close to some of those winter wheat crops, keeping a close eye on the margins to see if you're seeing any symptoms. And keep in mind that good rotation is going to help. We don't want to be seeing wheat on wheat or wheat on winter wheat. We want to try and break that green bridge. So if there is an issue, making sure you're cleaning up that crop well. Any kind of grassy weeds that may carry that infection, making sure it's sprayed down and dead before seeding that next crop, and utilizing a winter wheat variety that's resistant like AAC Radiant or AAC Elevate. So using those tactics of monitoring, managing your rotation, using good resistant varieties is going to help mitigate potential further issues.
Great stuff. Hey, Jeremy, I want you to hold on. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to hit on this topic of the components of yield with you. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, and it is Agronomic Monday.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. This segment's brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grain Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. And of course, we've got a new season this week launching of the Pest and Predator podcast, which is brought to you by Field Heroes. And I think we're talking first off with Dr. Megan Vankowski of AFC Saskatoon. So stay tuned for that this week. Pest and Predator podcast is into season 4 already, which is unbelievable. Our guest right now is Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions. Jeremy, I wanted to hit on this components of yield. You know, a lot of times we think about what makes up yield and we sort of isolate different factors, but there really is a number of variables that tie together that really, at the end of the day, equal out the yield that we're achieving with obviously an overlay of weather.
Yeah, absolutely, Shaun. And we work on all these separate tactics and trying to increase yield, and really they all come down to 4 components of wheat that make up yield, which is the number of heads per square foot, the number of spikes per head, the number of kernels per spike, and the test weight of that grain. And those 4 components is really what ends up being what the yield of that wheat is. So we really want to think about tactics that are going to maximize those and make the most out of the field that we're growing on. And we can do this on a field basis. And as we move forward and technology gets better and more advanced, we can do this on a square foot area and manage specific areas that may be more or less challenged with yield and variable rate management. But nevertheless, our goal is to increase those components as much as we can without spending more than we're getting back from. And one of the things, and again, it's going to come back to seeding rates, because what happens is we get these seeding rate recommendations, and it's coming from research based on what we've seen in small plot trials and where we get the best yield out of based on our seeding rates. And we've seen kind of a shift over the past little while from targeting specific plant stands to recommendations from research targeting specific seeding rates. And I don't know exactly why that change has happened and why we're getting seeding rate recommendations rather than plant stand recommendations, but that shouldn't take away from you as a farmer or an agronomist being able to think in plant stand establishment as a relation to yield. Because if we just stop at the number of seeds per square foot we put in the ground, we're not really following along the yield components and being able to ask the question of, are the decisions that I'm making based on seeding rate, how is that impacting my plant stand, which is going to directly impact my heads per square foot, and subsequently, potentially spikes per head and kernels per spike. But really, that yield component formula of heads per square foot and spikes per head and kernels per spike and test weight, heads per square foot plays the biggest role in yield. So we want to get the most heads and the most main head tillers or secondary tillers that we can to provide as much yield as possible. So if we keep track of the amount of seed we're putting down per square foot or per square meter, and then we go in and measure 21 to 28 days generally after it's a good time to take your plant stand count. Okay, what is my actual emergence that I got from that seeding rate? Is it reasonable? Am I losing 40% of my seed? Am I losing 10% of my seed? And then you can start making decisions on, is my seeding management practices ideal? Am I using good seed? Am I getting good emergence? And then you can actually relate the plant stand count that you get. And if you go in later at maturity, you can count the number of heads you have per square foot. And then at the end of the year, when you have your yield for that field, you can start to ask the question of how many heads per square foot is giving me the yield that I'm attaining, right? Because we know it plays a huge role. We don't want to take away from spikes per square head or kernels per spike or test weight, but that heads per square foot is going to play a big role. And if we can tie all of those components together, the seeding rate, the plant stand, the head per square foot, and then the yield component, we can start to think about, okay, what is my actual heads per square foot I'm seeing in my highest yielding fields? And what am I doing in those fields to target that? And are there other fields that are lacking? And what can I do to try and bring other fields to that level of heads per square foot? And that's where you can kind of start the basics of yield component to start asking those other individual agronomic questions of, okay, maybe I need to target this area. Maybe I need to treat my seed. Maybe I need a new seed lot. Maybe I need to be seeding at a higher seeding rate. And then if you continue to track those components year in and year out, you can really start to fine adjust those components and target those higher yield potential crops.
Yeah, don't jump from stand establishment to yield. There's things to scout and evaluate in between those two variables, right? And I think a lot of people, I don't have the data on this, so you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people go from, this was my seeding rate, I think the stand was okay, it seemed fine, and then to the yield. And we really hard, like you sort of described, we would really help ourselves if we did some of these other evaluations.
Yeah, it's almost like the seed hits the ground. We did the target seeding rate, which is great. It's good to see producers and agronomists target those seeding rates, but doing that follow-up, that diagnosis is of, did it actually target what I was hoping for, or what are my field conditions providing? That if I'm in a more drier region, and I put 300 seeds per meter squared down, and I'm getting 21 plants per square foot, but another field is getting 27, and there's a huge yield difference, you can start asking the question of, maybe this field needs a little bit different management with how I approach seeding. And maybe I can bring up the yield of that lower yielding field by looking at these components and asking those questions. But it always comes down to, you can't manage what you're not measuring. And these are relatively simple measurements that if you have a square foot, you can go out and pop it down over your crop and count the number of heads in there. And same with stand establishments at that 21 to 28 days. So it really it provides that framework for you to start to ask questions about, where am I missing out opportunity to capture yield?
And if you're listening to this and you're saying, well, what does it matter? I can't do anything about it now. Like, so if I go out there and I count the heads per square foot, like, so what? I can't fix if I made a bad decision, I can't fix it. The fixing happens in the next crop year. You apply that learning on the go forward. So it's what you can change is maybe some things that you do in the next crop year to not repeat a potential error in the calculation or a misjudgment in the condition, that kind of stuff. That's what we're talking about here. It's not about fixing a mistake or an issue. Like, yeah, you're right. You can't go back and change their seeding rate once that crop's out of the ground, unfortunately. But it's about the go forward year. So important stuff. Jeremy, I appreciate you bringing this up. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, it's a topic I'm passionate about, and I think if we focus, really on these yield components, it can give us a framework again to really start asking some of these questions and trying to build those yield components to maximize where we're headed with the crop.
Throughout the growing season, you can find Jeremy Boychyn on the Wheat School, as I mentioned earlier on the show. Go to wheatschool.com. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
Hey, when we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to talk to Nevin Rosaasen from Alberta Pulse Growers, and we're going to talk about something you maybe haven't heard of before, dynamic thresholds. Sounds interesting. We'll be right back right after this.
Could we talk about oats? If you're thinking about growing oats in 2023, how about trying CDC Endure from Alliance Seed? CDC Endure Oats is consistently one of the top yielding varieties in the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta provincial yield trials. With strong standability, excellent disease resistance, and excellent end-use quality, CDC Endure might be the variety for you and your farm. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers, Parrish and Heimbecker, Patterson Grain, and Northwest Terminal. For more information, visit allianceseed.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Great to have Jeremy Boychyn on the show here today. We got to get him on more often. Great stuff there. We're going to continue Agronomic Monday, but first I want to tell you about Granubor. It's from U.S. Borax. Ask for it by name. Make sure you go to borax.com. Last week, I was recording a new episode of the Pest and Predator podcast, and my guest was Nevin Rosaasen with Alberta Pulse Growers. He's their sustainability and government relations lead. And we were talking about biodiversity and kind of going back and forth. And we had wrapped up the podcast, and then we started talking about thresholds for insects and beneficials in the canopy. And Nevin brought up a concept of dynamic thresholds, and I was very intrigued because I actually don't know if I've actually heard that term before. But it's very, very fascinating. And so I wanted to have a further discussion with him about this. Nevin, great to chat with you.
Thanks, Shaun. Happy to be here.
Okay, so what is a dynamic threshold?
So a dynamic threshold is a little bit different than an economic threshold. When you're talking about economic thresholds and trying to make the decision on whether to take action, so that might be loading up the sprayer to go out and to take care of an insect pest problem. With an economic threshold, it's pretty simple. We have economic thresholds that are published. You can find them on different commission or canola council websites. We're saying if the price of canola is $18 and you have this many insect pests, when do you take action, right? So they can vary with the cost of spraying or the cost of the insecticide and the economic return. So how many bushels are you going to lose, et cetera. So basically it's a partial budget, and you can refine your economic threshold by saying my capital cost on my sprayer is X, my labor is X, my water hauling, et cetera, and my chemistry. That's what it costs to run the sprayer to do this application. And if I take action, I could save 4 bushels an acre. So does that return exceed the cost of spraying? And that would be your decisive factor to load up and spray. So that would be an economic threshold. Now, a dynamic threshold is looking at this whole concept we were discussing before, and that's these beneficial insects. So pollinators, which if you're using a broad spectrum foliar non-selective insecticide, something that kills everything, obviously your pollinators are going to not do well. But when you look at your parasitoids or your predator insects, then you start to wonder, well, how many of the crop pests can these actual beneficials, the parasitoids and the predator insects, take out? So I'll give you an example that happened on our farm last year. We had a pea aphid outbreak, and it was late season, and my brother sent me some photos of these pea plants, and they were riddled with aphids, right? And aphids are just a nasty pest. They're born pregnant. They reproduce like crazy, right? And they can be a really bad pest in peas, hence the word pea aphid. And my brother sent me some photos, and I recognized there were some little alligators in the photos. So those are the actual lady beetle larvae. And I asked him, well, how many lady beetle larvae are on the plants? And he said, well, 4 or 5 per plant. So I was speaking with Dr. Tyler Wiss, and I asked him how many pea aphids can these lady beetle larvae eat a day? And he said, well, around 90 per day for, that instar of lady beetle larvae. But when they're adults, they can eat 130 to 150 pea aphids per day. So my brother and I decided to wait because we were way past that threshold where we would normally take action. We waited 3 or 4 days, and lo and behold, we had no pea aphids left on the plants, and the whole field was full of lady beetles. So this demonstrates kind of the inaction that you might take if you have those crop pest specific predators or parasitoids in the field. So this concept is what is known as a dynamic threshold. And this is somewhere I would love to see more funding for research. I mean, we've got these great entomologists, great young, bright entomologists at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. A lot of them assist with Field Heroes. A lot of them are on Alberta Bug Chat on Wednesday mornings throughout the growing season. And it would be great to have some of this research done. The issue becomes it's quite expensive. And as we know, whenever you set out to do research, the insect pest doesn't show up, or maybe even that predator insect doesn't show. So we're looking at PhD projects, but this concept of dynamic threshold, so that, number one, we can ensure that we don't take out any of our pollinators or other beneficials in the field. Number two, we save money all around from not taking action and loading up the sprayer. And number three, it will greatly enhance and maintain our biodiversity on the landscape. So dynamic thresholds is an area that I'm passionate about. I bring it up often, and I'm told, Nevin, there just isn't the funding. So hopefully with the new SCAP program funding, we might be able to find a way to get around this and get some more funds, get some more grad students, some PhD candidates into the fold to do this very important research. Yeah,
it's where like intended procrastination could pay off.
Sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of procrastination, right? But yes, intended procrastination could pay off, and it's to let, these natural ecosystems play out and keep, those beneficial insects fed. And so certainly, I mean, more than unintended procrastination, I think it is looking at how we can use certain beneficial insects to our advantage and maintain that ecosystem health.
Now, Nevin, are you aware of this kind of data or this kind of decision-making tool being available in other geographies and other crops?
You know what, Shaun, to my understanding, I am not aware of any. Perhaps in our horticulture industry and in fruit growing regions, I mean, where you have higher value crops, you may see this type of research. I haven't done a literature review search for a long while on this. I've certainly spoken with our entomologists across the country, and certainly they're interested in this work. And I think there's an appetite from farmers for this work, and certainly from government. I mean, anytime you can stop a farmer from spraying, and I mean stop in a good way where there's a benefit, I think government should be interested in pursuing that research.
Nevin, very interesting. This is a topic I think we're going to hear more about, especially I know you're persistent. So
I am.
Yeah, you will continue to push this forward, I am sure. Nevin, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Thanks again, Shaun.
Very cool concept there of dynamic thresholds. This is something it would seem with how we've identified the importance of beneficials. We need to give farmers the tools and have the ability to do some of those quick calculations on what is the net decision when it comes to, hey, I identify this pest, I know I have this number, and I know I have this many beneficials. How does all that factor in? And also weather patterns too, right? That's another part of it. I do think, though, we were talking about, does this exist anywhere else? I do think on the soybean aphid advisor app in Eastern Canada, I believe that is a dynamic threshold app. So that we'll check into that. And if anybody out there knows that's listening, that's used the app, let us know. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. We talk about things to fund, to research. This seems like a pretty good one. This made a lot of sense to me in that regard for sure. As I've been doing the Pest and Predator podcast, though, I'll tell you this. One of the things that comes to mind a lot is it's easy for the entomologist to identify some of these pests in the net, and similar to weeds, where a weed can have many different names, and sometimes they are misidentified, and sometimes it's not a big deal. Similar to insects, sometimes not a big deal. But as I've interviewed the entomologists over the past 4 years, when they describe a pest, and they'll say, okay, it looks like this, and sometimes misidentified as that, and we can't make that misidentification because, hey, that's not actually a predator. Those kind of things, when we look in that net, and we can be in a hurry and try not to make the wrong decision, and people are inclined to be like, I don't know. Yep, okay, that's got to be that, and do the counts and make the decision and spray. And I think what Nevin was kind of getting at there is we're doing those counts and trying to identify properly, plus take into consideration with that those beneficials. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot happening inside that canopy. There's no doubt about that. And I say that that's what's been so interesting about these Pest and Predator podcasts, to be honest with you, is it's a reminder of the whole ecosystem that is happening inside that canopy. It is just absolutely, I don't know, it kind of blows my mind, to be honest with you. Maybe some of you are like, whatever, not a big deal. I think it's very, very interesting as all of these bugs, and you got the plants and the soil, obviously, and it's all interacting. And that's what's just so I'm always learning when I'm interviewing these entomologists for the Pest and Predator podcast. Make sure you check out the Pest and Predator podcast. I encourage you to do so. We are on season 4, and we got a new episode dropping this week. So stay tuned for that for sure. Let's take a quick break. We've got more coming up here on Agronomic Monday. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Now, earlier on the show, we were talking to Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Wheat Barley Commission, and we were talking about evaluating that winter wheat stand. And he mentioned too early in Western Canada. Too early. We're not ready yet. Got to think more with May, okay? But in Ontario, different story, of course, and we were joking about that earlier. On a recent Wheat School episode, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson had a chance to catch up with C&M Seeds' Rob McLaughlin. And they talked about how to do the evaluation of that winter wheat stand right now. And here's that discussion.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and oh my gosh, it's spring of 2023 here in Ontario. I'm in a wheat field, an incredible wheat field. The wheat crop looks amazing. We've got big acres. People are actually thinking that the 2023 crop looks as good this spring as the 2021 crop looked, and that crop was so thick you couldn't walk through it. So wait a minute, I couldn't walk through it. Well, I want really big yields. How do we get really big yields? You know, we go to the Great Lakes Yen, and one of the strongest correlations, now I got to be really careful because correlation does not mean causation, but when you look at every big yield grower in the competition, they have big head counts. Lots of heads per square foot, per square meter, per square whatever you want to use. So the big question is, do we have those big head counts, which comes down to stem counts? And if we do, how do we assess it right now? Because right now is when we are making those management decisions. So really cool, C&M Seeds has a stand assessment calculator to help you do that. And I'm going to ask Rob McLaughlin, C&M Seeds, to come in and walk us through how we use that stand assessment calculator. So, wow, Rob, the stand assessment calculator, the amount of work you've put into that is amazing. And finally, we can figure out, do we have enough heads per square foot, per square meter? Like, do we have big wheat yields? And then we can make management decisions. So tell me, how do I work the stand assessment calculator? Walk me through the mechanics of it.
Yeah, so what we're really basing our numbers off of is a number from Phil Needham. He was targeting 500 to 600 heads per square yard and trying to decide if above that's going to be lodging, of course. Below that, we need to do some work to get some more heads.
Yeah.
And that number has become really important to us. We translated that back to square feet and built our stand assessment calculator off over a few years of work with that.
Okay, so first off, heads per square yard, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
But anyway, heads per square, like, we're not going to count a square yard. So we're going to do it in feet, right?
That's right.
Let's walk through you're going to take that, we're going to measure how much row,
That's right.
How do we walk through that?
Number one, we have to know what our planting width is, our row width. So we take that row width. Most plots in the province are 7.5 inch rows,
Yep,
right?
Absolutely. What about if I'm broadcast?
Broadcast? Well, unfortunately, you have to go back to the old way and count inside this thing.
Yep.
Let's throw that out the window.
Well, if you're broadcast, at least we have a tool, right, for 1 square foot.
That's
so
right.
I'm 7.5 inch rows.
That's right.
How much row do I measure?
You're going to measure 1 foot of row.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I use, I'll go out there with my trusty shovel. I know that's 11 3/4 inches, so I need to add a quarter inch to that.
A wee bit.
That's right, just a wee bit.
Yeah.
You use your...
Oh, wait, this is another way? Yep. Oftentimes
That's
I'll
right.
use my foot. My foot's actually exactly 12 inches, so that's okay. But to be exact, you can't, it's pretty, everybody has one of these, right?
That's
so
right.
If you don't have a tool, this works.
Exactly. So we go out there, and our first job is to find out how many plants per foot of row we have.
So that's pretty easy in a thin stand. How would you do it in this stand? Like, this is so thick. How are you going to know how many plants?
Yep. This is the hardest one. We're actually going to have to get down there. We're going to be starting to pull apart those plants, and it's a pretty arduous job. It's a lot of work, and you got to be careful to get those counts right. I've been in fields before. We've had some tremendously different numbers from different agronomists. So
yeah, and so one of the ways you could do, it's more work, and once you get onto it, I think, like, you probably don't have to dig them up because you've done it enough. I think I've done it enough. But the first few, just take that 1 foot of row, dig them up, pull them apart, and find out actually how many plants that
That's
you
right.
have.
That's
And then
right.
once you have many plants, what are you looking for then? Once you get to these number of plants.
So after that, our second number to find out how many heads per square foot we have is to decide how many of these tillers we have. We have, on this particular plant, we have, what did we count?
I think
5?
I think that one's 5.
Yep.
This one for sure is
So
5.
we're digging up a plant, and we're pulling those apart, and we're trying to decide each plant how many tillers that has, because that's our number 2 number we have to input into the calculator.
So in that stand assessment calculator, we need seeds per foot of row, we need or plants rather, plants per foot of row, and then tillers per plant, and that's going to give us our number. So just wait a minute though, because as we go through this, I'm looking at this plant, and if I count every tiller on this plant, I'm going to get to, I don't know, 10, 11, 12. Do I count every tiller?
Yeah, well, that's probably not, and that's going to be a little bit up to what you think is going to survive. There's going to be a few little tillers on there. They're going to cannibalize themselves. So we're probably not going to be able to maintain more than 5 in most situations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think actually, so one of the ways I look at it is the thickness of the stem compared to the other stems. And if you don't have at least 2 leaves on a tiller, in a stand like this, it doesn't count at all. So right. it is a bit of an art in terms of where you're at. A thin stand, like a late planted stand, you got 1 tiller there, it doesn't matter, it has 1 leaf, you're counting it, right?
Exactly.
So again, it is a little bit. So we've got our numbers now, Rob, and on average, we've got 18 plants per foot of row.
That's right.
Where the tiller count's high, so let's say it's 4. There's the odd plant with only 3. There's some plants with 5, but let's say 4 tillers per plant.
Yep.
I go to seedingrate.ca. That's right. That's the stand assessment calculator.
Pull out your phone. You can put right on your phone. You're going to need 3 numbers. You're going to need your seeding width, your row width, your plants per foot of row, and your tiller count. Now remember, tiller count, you have to include that main stem. So you're counting all those stems, not tillers, not just tillers.
So we call it tillers, and the main stem's not a tiller, but we really are counting stems per plant, not just tillers, right?
That's right. So the nice thing is, it's all on your phone. We've inputted those numbers, and in this particular field, we have 144 heads per square foot.
Okay, so on the yen, the most I think we've ever had is kind of 120. So obviously, we're going to cannibalize a few more tillers here than what you and I think.
That's right.
It would be wonderful if this field could tolerate 144 heads per square foot. It's not going to do it. So, Rob, from that perspective, management now.
Yeah.
So we know we have big. What are you going to do management-wise?
Yeah, the good thing is now you have some numbers to base your decisions on, and I think that's the real key here. If you're a thin stand or a thick stand, you want some numbers to base those decisions on. In this particular field, 144 heads per square foot, hopefully we can delay that end. We don't want to create any more tillers in this field, so hopefully we can delay that end until growth stage 30.
And nobody wants to delay end, but if you're going to, on a field like this, for goodness sakes, the first app, if you want to go early, because everybody's anxious to do something, you keep that rate really low, kind of 50, 60 pounds of nitrogen, 70 at the very most. And then I think the other part of that, Rob, is big yield potential. So we're probably, unless something goes south between now and second application, that second application is a solid number, might be another 100 pounds of nitrogen, get up 140, 150 pounds of nitrogen. What about a growth regulator?
Yeah, exactly. That's our next decision. We know we're at high risk for lodging. I think we're at high risk for lodging in my numbers. It's around the 70 plus heads per square foot.
Yeah, and typically I would say 80. If you're over 80 for sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is it depends on variety. So if you have a lodging-prone variety and you're at 65, I might use a PGR. If I'm at a really strong strawed variety, maybe 80.
Yeah, this is Hilliard, and it's actually a strong strawed variety, but at 144, we are still at a huge risk for lodging. So, man, I'm hoping the decision here is going to be let's consider that PGR and let's get it on to the right time.
And maybe even 2 PGRs if it was a lodging-prone variety, right? Like those kind of numbers. So there you have it. A really cool tool from C&M Seeds. Rob actually developed it, and a way to put a little more science into the wheat crop. Have a look, get out there, do some stand counts.
Yeah, get out there and do some stand counts. I don't care what crop it is. Jeremy brought this up so well today. Whatever crop it is, get out there and do that connection between seeding rate, stand count, evaluate the heads per acre in the case of wheat, for example. Connect the dots all the way through that yield spectrum. So the components of yield, I should say. So great stuff here today on the program. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and of course Twitter. Or you can call the Real Ag feedback line. Why not? 855-776-6147. The rest of the week is kind of up in the air, kind of a special. We're going to have some special stuff because the whole RealAg team, as I mentioned, is getting together in Calgary this week. And so we're going to have an opportunity for the shows the rest of the week to be some panels, some discussions. We'll maybe have some interviews too. But it's going to be kind of a fun week this week. So make sure that you catch the rest of this week's shows because it is going to be a lot of fun here on RealAg Radio. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by high-performing new carbine insecticide from FMC. New carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, and extended control. It also has activity on ligas and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer today.